I'm Bob Strauss. I'm a professional photographer. I've been a professional photographer for about 45 years. I was not trained as a photographer. I know almost nothing about the technical side of photography. I'm a Wharton economist by training. Are you videoing or are you? Okay. And I ran a couple of companies before I became a photographer, and at some point I decided I didn't want to do that, and I went out and bought a camera and became a photographer. And all of my career, if I found something I didn't know how to do, I've just asked somebody. There are lots of people that I know I live in Houston. There are lots of guys with the Houston Chronicle that have been there for many, many years that know I don't know anything, and because I call them at 3 o'clock in the morning and ask them how to do it. And now that we use computers, I know even less. So I do know how to make a picture, though. And the purpose of this is to have you, and when I give these talks, it instructs me as well, make better pictures so that you don't have to spend all of your time in post-production unless that's what you really want to do. I don't overshoot in digital, but the mindset, and I've given talks on shooting digital with a film mindset, and I guess the core of that is that every time you take 36 images, assume it's costing you $20, because that's what it costs for a roll of film and processing. So you don't go out and shoot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures just because you can delete them. So the idea is to understand the basics of photography when you shoot with digital and all the technical tools that it gives you to make better images to start off with. And so when you finish shooting, you've got a collection of images that you really like. And for 30 years, traveling around the world as a film shooter, I never once doubted that I had the image on film. And we would go out, and Chris did that because Chris shot film. We would go out and shoot, we might shoot 100 rolls of film, and we might be halfway around the world, and we'd put that in a bag and ship it to whoever sent us there, raw film, and we'd go to dinner. And now every time you take a picture on a digital camera, you look at the back of the camera because you're not sure you actually made a picture. And that's significant because one of the things that digital has done, it's done it with me, it's done it with, I'm sure, with a lot of you. You're not as sure every time you make that image that it's actually there. With film, you pretty much, if you knew the fundamentals of photography when you started, you pretty much knew that you had an image. Might not have been the best image, but you knew if you picked the right film, you knew how to expose it under the conditions, whatever existed, you probably had an image. Now I would go, traveling around the world, Kodak had labs all over the world. And they made the same commitment that Coca-Cola did in the Second World War. Coca-Cola said, there's going to be a Coca-Cola for every American soldier anywhere in the world that they go. And they did that. Kodak, pretty much after the war, did the same thing for tourists, which is one of the reasons that Kodak has the problems that it has, because its competitors didn't have the bricks and mortar all over the world to deal with that they did. But as a Kodak shooter, I got VIP treatment at these labs anywhere they had one in the world, and so every once in a while I would take a roll in and process it just to make sure the equipment was working, and that would be it. I'd never process the whole thing because it's too bulky to deal with. So the object of this is to think, when you make a picture, think how you want it to look, how you want to frame it, who's going to look at it, which is very important, the subject, and remember all of those things and go back to basics. And a lot of you obviously have been photographing for a long time, and many of you probably welcome the automation you get in new cameras, but you really need to know the fundamentals. And if you know the fundamentals and you lock those into your camera, these new cameras. And I shoot, at the tennis, I shoot everything on manual. I don't shoot aperture or preferred or any of the automatic settings. And I carry a light meter around, which Chris has seen me use, and half the people there don't even know what it is. But it makes me feel good. I don't know whether it works, but it makes me feel comfortable to carry it. So the fundamentals are important. And my mission, if there is one, is to have photographers, amateurs and professionals alike, understand how important fundamentals are in making good images. Just because you can delete a picture or fix it on a computer is not an excuse to not make a good image to start off with. And if you've ever made a great picture that you really liked, no matter what the subject is, no matter where it is, and then didn't remember how you did it, the next time, this is what you need to do. And the object of this is to think about how you made that picture, why it looks the way you like it, and why you liked it, and why the other people that you may give it to or send it to or whatever likes the picture. So as we go through this, and there'll be a slideshow on here, and if you have any questions, jump in and ask. You'll see how almost all of these pictures on here, not all, well, now preparation for this, probably 60 to 70% of them were shot on film. And some of these go back 30 and 40 years. And there's virtually no cropping. They were scanned off of film, obviously, slides mostly. There's almost no cropping, maybe some small adjustments, but that's it. And if you can do that, and you go out and you go on a vacation and you come back with 500 or 600 pictures, you don't have to spend a week at your computer adjusting them. You can make minor adjustments, and then you're ready to go to print them or however you, or send them on emails or however you want to do. So if any of you have, as I said, if you have questions about what the purpose is about being a thinking photographer, it's always understand the purpose of the picture. And everybody has a different purpose. I don't know why you shoot. This gentleman right here said because he likes to do it. It's something that he's now got the time to do and he likes to do it. And many of us do that. And I just told him that if I didn't enjoy what I'm doing, I wouldn't do it. Because I wasn't a photographer. I didn't work for the school newspaper. I've never, in my career, never developed a roll of film. I have no idea how to do it. Never wanted to know how to do it. I ran businesses and decided to be a photographer. And if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it. And I've had a great career. I've had a blessed career in many ways. I've worked for great companies, and hopefully some of these images are pretty good. And now that we have digital, I see people out there who don't understand the fundamentals because, well, one, they don't have to because they can fix everything on the computer. And most of those people know far more about computers than I do. I use Photoshop. There are what? I don't know how many tools are there in Photoshop? 300, 400? I know how to use maybe 10. And they're the 10 that I have to use. And I don't want to know the other ones because I can, just like developing film, I always knew I could pay somebody that knew far more about it than I did to develop the film instead of me standing in a dark room for 8 hours a day. I'd rather go to dinner and let them do it. And it's the same way I feel about post-production. I did an event recently and I had 8,000 images. After it was a huge event, a worldwide event, and a huge event. I had 8,000 images, and I told my client, I said, "You're lucky this isn't film because your film bill would have been through the roof." But I had to deal with those images. A lot of photographers there probably had 15 or 20,000 images, which I won't do. So let me get into this, and I'll start a slideshow. Is anybody interested? I have on here a bio. If anybody's interested, anybody interested in seeing a bio? I'll show it briefly, and then I'm going to show a client list, and it'll give you some idea of the kind of companies that I work for. David mentioned that I do volunteer work. If you're familiar with the Police Athletic League in New York, which started here in 1914, I run it in Houston. And it mentors inner city at-risk kids with police officers. And I was even doing things like that when I was in college in Philadelphia. So, but this will give you a little idea of my background and why I had to learn photography the way I did. And I learned something every day. I learned things almost every day at the Open, just from talking to other photographers. And one of the things, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but the internet is a new beast for photographers, because once you put something on the internet, it's gone. And I was just contacted by somebody through my website that wanted to use 2 of my images, which they took off my website without permission and put in a mock-up. And it's a company that does collectibles online, and the subject of the collectible, let's say it's you, and you're a baseball player and you have a career, they can then use those to advance their own brand. It's something, and they wanted to know how much I was going to charge them. I had not a clue. And I talked to 5 or 6 photographers at the Open. Nobody had an idea, but we came up with a pretty big number, because this is worldwide and it's commercial use for a year. So I go back to the guy and I say, give me some idea. What should I charge? He said, well, we normally pay $50 an image. I said, well, you better go someplace else, because you're not going to get them from me. And not only is this new to all of us that are professionals, but the legal side of it, and I have to deal with copyright, and that's a whole different talk, and I've dealt with it a lot. The copyright laws have not kept up with the internet. They really, not only do the lawyers not understand it, but the judges don't understand it. So it's a whole different animal. And I'll put the client list up here. Chris, you can't copy this. And it'll give you some idea of the kind of people that I've worked for over the years. This is, by the way, greatly abbreviated. But you can see, I decided when I became a photographer that 1, I wanted to work for myself, and 2, I didn't want to do the same thing all the time. And that has to do with sports, it has to do with everything. And I really wanted to experience as much as I could as a photographer. And if you look at this client list, it's pretty broad as far as the kind of work that it takes. And when you do the corporate side, and this goes back to fundamentals, which I had to learn, when somebody sends you to Botswana or Jakarta or someplace to shoot an oil facility, it may cost them, and this was 30 years ago, it may cost them $100,000 just to get you there. And you're there by yourself. It's not an event where there's 50 other photographers around, and they expect you to come back with a product, no matter what the conditions are. Now, the good thing is if you work for an ad agency or something and you've got somebody from the agency, if the conditions are horrible, just completely impossible to photograph, and at least there's somebody there as a witness that knows you can't do it. But 90% of the time, you're not. And I had to photograph some art in a museum once, and I was in a room that was probably 8 times the size of this room, and there was probably $200 million worth of art on the wall, and the only light in the whole room was a single cord in the middle of the room with a 60-watt bulb on it. And I couldn't use lights, because it damages the art. So you had to learn how to do that. We had to learn how to use filters. We had to learn how to do it at the US Open. When it got dark, you had to filter your film. And if you filtered it, it slows it down, so you can't use high shutter speed. So we had to deal with all of that stuff. So this you get an idea of the breadth of this, and it's pretty, it actually impresses me. So hopefully give you some idea, and when you see some of these images, you'll get a better idea of what I do. So let's start a slideshow, and I don't know how to do this, so it's. Where is it? Huh?
Under view?
Oh, there it is at the bottom.
Yeah.
Slideshow.
Yep. This is a new version of. This is in Nepal, and I went there with CARE International. A man had given a lot of money to CARE to do water purification projects, and I went there with thing. It was a marvelous trip. So, and these first pictures are from that trip. They're either in Nepal or India, and it's, when you photograph people, you really, especially in these locations, you really have to have a rapport. This is in India.
Any kind of release or
No, you don't. Overseas, you really don't. You do, and I'll get into that later. I mean, you don't want to impose on them, and you don't want to. At least I don't. And you don't want to do things that would make them uncomfortable. So I try not to. And years ago, years ago, I used to carry a Polaroid camera with me, because I would photograph people who had never even seen a picture of themselves, much less had one taken, and they wanted the picture. And of course, I was shooting film; I couldn't give it to them, and so I would take a picture, and they would give me their house. If you want. Yes.
Did you, on those first couple of shots, the portrait shots, did you use film flash?
On the first one I did. The rest one, no. Yeah, but I had it set very low, so it was not. It didn't overwhelm the subject. This woman gave me that fish, by the way.
So you're using, for all the outside shots we just saw, you're using that just natural light?
Absolutely.
And knowing how to frame it so the light falls where
Yes,
you want.
I know. I understand light. I could, at one time, I don't know if I can do it now, but I could tell a quarter of a stop adjustment by the way the light felt on the back of my neck. So I'm older now. I can't do that. So always look. Again, this is composition. Always look for angles and different ways to do things and see things, and you'd be surprised at how easy it is to move around a little bit to find your subject. Yes.
Where were you standing? Where were you?
I was up in the grid, in the light grid above the court.
Okay.
And actually, the story was physical contact in the NBA, and from the floor you can't really see it. From up there you can see it. I mean, you just look at this one picture. I mean, there's. Again, it's one of my favorite players who happened to have my same birthday. She's retired now. Using elements to frame a subject, and again, none of these are cropped. And if you can do it, and you'll see this in the next few pictures, frame the picture in your head first, and then see it as you get ready to shoot. And if you have to move a little bit, whatever, then try to do that. So, Emily Mauresmo, French player. But here's on a drilling rig offshore, and it's framed by the workers. Same thing here. This guy makes pacemakers. Actually, they made one for me with my name on it, and have him surrounded by. This is in his clean room. Here you get a design element. This is for a farming company, and you get a design element, which I always look for with the field doing this. You could have done that from ground level, but you wouldn't have gotten the pattern. This is not the way to start an Olympic bike race, by the way. I don't know where he finished, if he finished. This was coming back from the U.S. Open at Olympic, not this year, but 10 years ago. And I was with a friend, and we came over this hill, and I looked back, and these guys had finished, and they were walking out to their car, and I jumped out of the car, and I said, "Get back out there and putt." And my friend said to me, "Those pictures will never come out." And he had, I think, a 16 by 20 over his desk. You know. This is Positano, if you've been on the Amalfi Coast. And I was driving along the coast, and I looked down, and the sun was setting, and it only illuminated the city. There's no adjustment on this at all, no cropping, nothing else. That was exactly what the light was. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of light, and I was shooting film, so get back to fundamentals. There's Diana. This happens to be at Wimbledon, and she's wearing the ring, of course. It was the famous ring. It's been knocked off by everybody in the world. It's one of my favorite pictures of Jordan. I was the photographer for CBS Sports for 10 years, and this was one of the NBA championship games. Yeah.
I like the angle of CBS Sports.
Well, that's what we get paid for. One of the things, Chris has never had this problem, but one of the problems with film is often you would have film in the camera, and you need to put a faster film in there, and you take it out, and you've got images on there, and you mark it or whatever, and then you put it back and use it again. And this was totally accidental. I put a roll of film that I'd shot these flowers on there, and then I shot Kornikova, and this picture was absolutely total accident of double exposure, but they can work out. Arnold Palmer's been a friend for many, many years. Next picture is the cover of his autobiography, and that's his last U.S. Open at Oakmont. And every other photographer shot it from the front, and I shot it from the back because everybody knows Arnold Palmer. And this is to me, it's a much better image. And this is, again, this is what I wanted. I knew this before, so I didn't scurry up there to get the picture. By the way, after this, Arnold went into a little opening in the stands to a secure area back there, and he asked me to go with him. I was the only photographer there, and he was crying. And I was talking to him to get him. He had to be interviewed, and he had to settle down. And I said, "Can I photograph you?" And he said, "No problem." So I have the only pictures of it. And then he went into the interview and sat down. There were no still photographers there. Only the TV was there. And they asked him one question, and he started crying again, and stood up, and they gave him he said, "I can't do this." Gave him a standing ovation, and he left, and so I was the only photographer that photographed him. So there are benefits to having friends. This is the cover of his autobiography, and I shot that down in Jamaica. And that picture was used probably 20 times, licensed 20 times over the years. There's Ali, and he's fighting Spinks.
That's who that was.
Did you want a picture of Spinks?
No.
Oh, okay. I have a picture somewhere of him, but
I just knew it looked familiar.
this was America's Cup. The last time it was in Newport, when we lost it to the Australia 2, which is in the lead there. And I shot that hand holding a 600 millimeter lens standing on the front of a boat.
Wow.
And you could shoot from the air, but I wanted to shoot it from the water. So again, thinking ahead, I had to know what the lens could do. I had to know what speeds I could use and the limits of the film.
What did you do?
I don't have any idea. But let me tell you, photographers that 5 years later they say, "Well, I shot that at f/5.6 at 500th of a second." They're guessing, unless they kept notes, which I don't do. So. This is actually on my, and I don't know why the bird was up there, because this is on my desktop. This is the Amish in southern Pennsylvania. I have photographed in that area for 50 years. I've driven back and forth. I drive up from Texas, drove up to Philadelphia when I went to college, and I drive up here once a year. And it's a marvelous photograph. This was last fall on my way back. And again, if you look at the composition, I wanted the tree in there because it gives it perspective, it gives it scope, and these next pictures are and so here, obviously there are lots of ways you can shoot a picture like this, but if you have the clothes, it sort of, obviously those are the clothes that the Amish use, and the cows and the farm in the back, it sort of tells the whole story. Now, I'll get to storytelling in a minute. And this I just took a couple of weeks ago on my way up.
And the Amish don't have problems with you taking photos of it?
Well, this girl was picking flowers, and I was in my car, and I pulled up next to her, and I said, "Would you mind if I take your picture?" And she said, "No, I don't want you to take my picture." And then she thought a minute. She said, "Okay, you can take my picture." So I made a picture of her, actually a tight shot. And she came. She said, "Can I see it?" And so she obviously knows digital. So she came over and looked at the picture, and I said, "Would you like a copy of it?" And she said, she thought for a minute. She said, "No, I don't think so," because I don't think she wanted her family to know that she had done it. And there's a family at the end of this road next to their farm that's a very prominent family, the Fisher family, and I got to know them 5 or 6 years ago because I was photographing there, and one of the kids ran over and grabbed me and said, "Bring your camera, come with me," and he ran around the barn, and there was a bald eagle in the field, which you never see in that part of the thing. So I photographed the bald eagle, and I made about 50 prints and sent them to him, and some guy called me that was doing a calendar, an Amish calendar, and wanted to use it. So anyway, I said, "I'll leave the print at the Fishers, and you can go pick it up if you want." And she thought, and she said, "No, I don't want to do that." So, but I got wonderful pictures of her. So just down the road, I saw this, and I went over, and they do have a problem, although they deal with it in different ways. And I was talking to them, and instead of bringing my big camera, I brought this out, and I shot this with this camera. And the girl with the flowers walked up while I was doing it. She's obviously the same family. And when she saw me, a big smile, but she didn't say anything because she didn't want anybody to know that she had talked to me. And this little girl came and looked at the picture, and the father, who's working on the hitch on this wagon, got up and he said, "Where'd that picture come from?" And I said, "Well, I just made it." He said, "We don't like our picture taken." So I mumbled something and moved on. This was from this tournament, and again, this is from the promenade, which is upstairs, and it does a lot of things. You get very graphic pictures, and you'll see some more later. You get very graphic pictures, but you also get a clean background. You don't get advertising. You don't get hands and feet and people in the background. This is obviously Andy Roddick. Here's from the top of the stadium. This is not this year because I don't think, Chris, was there a day that it was this full in the daytime?
Not until the end.
I don't remember.
Not in this light.
No, not with this light. That's right. This was last year. And there's, if you're a Bjorn Borg fan, one of the nice things about the way the tennis tour used to be. This is in a swimming pool in Jamaica. We knew these guys well, and we traveled with them and had dinner with them and went out with them, and Bjorn's still a good friend. And today you don't have that access. I mean, the world changed after 9/11, and the whole mindset of parents and agents and everything else. I mean, there's some exceptions, but there are not many exceptions, and you don't get this kind of access anymore. By the way, there's no rhyme or reason to the order of these pictures. That's Barbara Mandrell, the singer, and she flew with the Thunderbirds. This was for Time magazine. And there we are afterwards. This is in Bali. She's a sheep herdess, whatever they are. Again, Bali, any part of that world over there, the light is unbelievable and the colors are great, and all this is on film. This is in a battery plant in Italy, and once again you get the perspective. There's no cropping here, but you get the depth perspective, but you also get somebody in there to give you some idea of the size of these things and the size of the room, which is very important. Anybody here read Emily Post, the Manners books? When did Emily Post live?
She died in the 60s?
60s?
No, maybe earlier?
And she made her books in the 20s, which is what I would have said.
Yeah.
1890s. This is her grandson,
Oh my God.
and he's 86. And his wife, unfortunately died of cancer a little over a year ago.
I know, I think it's like, because there's some group still maintains it.
She
and
doesn't.
updates it.
She
Updates it.
did the books, and she just died of cancer. I don't know what's going to happen. And he's now, they're our neighbors. We have a home in Vermont, and they're our neighbors, and he's now moved to Florida. But I was amazed because I thought she wrote her books in the 20s and 30s, and it was in the 1890s. There's Billy Carter. I traveled with Billy Carter for 5 days, which was pretty amazing. And actually, he was an extremely interesting guy. He got a bad rap. He wasn't drunk 24 hours a day. He did go out party every night, but which I didn't. He was promoting this toy, which was a pickup truck, and I was working for the toy company. This is in Newport, and again, it's composition and color. That's the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. And instead of taking the standard Blue Mosque picture, I made it a silhouette, which I did at the time. And that's exactly the picture that I took. These are pump jacks in Texas. And again, using silhouettes because a picture of a pump jack is not very interesting by itself, unless you happen to be Lufkin and make the pump jack.
How'd you get, I mean, was the sky really that red?
Yes.
Or did you
Yes.
use any
No.
gels?
Nope. It was that. This is prior to the first of the great Borg McEnroe matches at Wimbledon.
Good old man. He's got.
And I might add that I have McEnroe's rackets from both of those matches that he handed me on the court. First one from this match is broken because he broke it over a chair because he lost the first one. I've done a number of movies as still photographer for a number of movies, and this was, anybody see Local Hero?
Oh, I love that movie.
Well, I was a still photographer for Local Hero, and I had met Burt Lancaster on the set, but not really talked to him. And he called me one day, and he said, "Can you come to my hotel? I need a photograph for Architectural Digest." I said, "Sure." So I came up, which I could have done. I could have done the picture for in 5 minutes. We spent about 3 hours together, and we actually stayed in touch the rest of his life. And here we are. I think the bellboy took that picture. Yeah. I was younger, by the way. And again, this is elevated, makes a clean background. It's composed the way I want it, and blurred. Now this is digital, and I have it framed. And you'll see later in here, you'll see some cards that I've made. This is exactly as I shot it. These are obviously Canadian geese. I don't remember where I shot it, but I did do it. Anybody a Sex and the City fan? Nobody? This is the author. And that's in 1977. And that photograph was used in her next to last book, which was Carrie before she came to New York. So they wanted a picture of her before she came to New York, and this was before she came to New York. So it's Candace Bushnell, by the way. Once again, this was digital, but I knew what I wanted. I thought it out. This is shot not underwater. This is through an aquarium, but I knew what the light was. I made the adjustments before I started, and I only took a couple of pictures because the people that owned the business ran me off, but it worked. And again, you have to look at everything because I walked by and saw this, and luckily I had a camera in my hand. I don't think that child would do that if those bars weren't there. Anybody motor racing fans? Dale Earnhardt. This was the day he died. I was the night before, I was the last one with him, photographer with him, working for Fox. This is about 3 laps before he died, and this is Michael Waltrip, who Earnhardt was actually blocking for Waltrip when he was killed. And this is, I gave a print of this to Michael. And this was 2 or 3 laps before he died. And this is Dale's last, I think, yeah, that's his last pit stop. I was in Junior's pit when Dale was killed. And once again, this was the New York Times. These are oil drilling pipes in the hull of a ship. And I would have liked it if some of these guys were wearing bright red or something to stand out, but I wanted the design element. Yeah. Again, composition. That's Warren Moon and Earl Campbell. Both are good friends, and this wasn't the end result, but it was my favorite picture of the take. So, here's the picture this was shot on a golf course. This is the picture that you saw when you came in, and this is exactly the way it looked. The water from the angle this was behind a tee box, and the water was absolutely black, and this egret was there. That's Eva Le Gallienne. I don't know if any of you remember, one of the great actresses, and this was on a movie set in Texas. This is in Fez, Morocco, and they're dyeing camel skins. And the only way you can get this picture, you can shoot it from the ground, but the only way you can get this is to climb up on one of the buildings. And of course, the buildings are only 2 stories high, so. But it's a much better picture, and this picture I've used quite a few times over the years. This was a long time ago. But because of the design, it's great. There's Farah, and that's shot with a fisheye. And I'm probably about that far from her, so. And once again, I have a colleague who's a great photographer. One of his photographs was a photograph of the year about 5 years ago worldwide. And he says the only lens I know how to use is a fisheye, which I use a lot. And this is an example of that. And I was actually hand holding this. A lot of people use remotes. This is at the Country Club in Boston, and it's the Sunday round of the U.S. Open, which ended in a tie. And they had a playoff the next day, and there was virtually nobody there. So luckily, I got up on the broadcast booth and made that photograph. There's Gary Player. That's on a beach in Jamaica. That's Gordon Parks. Does everybody here have a good idea of who Gordon was? There are 2 exhibits that Gordon has here now in New York, one in Harlem and one at International Center for Photography. And I have not been to him. Gordon was a very, very close friend. And I'm going to take that picture to the exhibits. This is the dreaded Halliburton. And the people there, I mean, the equipment is massive, and the people there are again, for perspective, and I framed it specifically this way. Once again, I knew exactly what I wanted when I went in there. This is not how to dismount a bull. No. I shoot a lot of rodeos, and I used to stand out in the arena with the bulls. I was maybe this far, 10, 12 feet from. In those days, I could run fast enough to get up the fence if they came after me. All of you probably have tried to shoot fireworks, and once again, I go back to what I said earlier about if you've ever made a picture, a really nice picture, and then couldn't remember how you did it. I never remember how I did it, and this is for the city of Houston, and I was on a building out. And this is the natural light. There's a wall behind this, and I did it in silhouette. And here's the same. It's a different feeder in the same place. And I chose to do this in a silhouette, so I set everything before they got there, because I knew what I wanted, and I set everything before the speed, everything before they arrived. This is Rick Mears at Indy 500. Rick's car is on fire, I have the only, that I know of, the only still pictures of it. I was on my way to his pit. If it had been one pit stop later, I would have been standing right next to those tires when his car was on fire, and it's burning ethanol, which you cannot see when it burns until you walk into it. And Rick has scars today. Rick's never looked at these pictures. His crew has, and I know Rick pretty well. He doesn't want to see them. But as far as I know, I shot 20 images, and they're the only, as far as I know, they're the only still pictures of it. This is recently, and all these guys were playing in a tournament, and they were taking them, they were just finished, and they were taking them to a press conference, and I said, no, they're going to take a picture with me, because I know them all, and they're all friends, and the press people went crazy because I wouldn't let them go, and I forced them to take this picture, so.
Senior master?
Huh?
Senior master?
No, it was a special exhibition. This is Jake Weber. I don't know if you know him. He was a star of a TV show.
He was.
And Jake's a friend, and this was a movie in New Mexico, and we were actually on lunch, and I saw this rainbow, and I grabbed Jake, and I said, get up on that hill, and I made this picture, and it became the signature picture of the movie. So. That's in Jamaica, and I'm standing in the water right next to these guys with a wide-angle lens. And again, I could have shot them in any way with a long lens, and chose not to do that. Environmental portraits. This is a very good example of it, where you use all the elements that are around there. And I obviously I shot tighter photographs as well, but this is my favorite, because I use all the elements just for the dog. I don't know who the girl is. This is John Connally, and he was the governor of Texas, and he was in the car with Kennedy and was shot when Kennedy was shot. And this was a take that I did out at his ranch, and it was a great take. And I did basically two portraits of him, that one and this one. I've never decided which one I like better. And Connally is no longer with us. Here's another portrait. There's a woman and her two children that she adopted. And again, composition. This is, everything here is exactly the way it was done. I keep beating that point in. It's Kenny Rogers. I've known Kenny Rogers since he was, probably since the late 60s, when he was with the First Edition. Kenny was born in Houston. Here we are on a golf course. Here's B.B. King and Willie Nelson, and that's Chris Christopherson sticking his face in the picture. This was backstage at a concert, and this, I did a movie with Chris. This was, who was I saying about my equipment? That's that same lens, and this was a long time. That's my 300-2.8. That's a long time ago. That's Lamar Hunt, who died unfortunately a couple of years ago. And Lamar, he had been jogging, and he and I ran together in places. He ran World Championship tennis, which went all over the world, and he and I used to run in different cities all over the world. And that's Sea Hunt. I actually met his stunt double once years ago.
Oh, that's a great shot.
This is an example that Chris can do this, of course, because he's a top photographer. But most photographers today could not make this image, because this is not with autofocus. I took one picture. I estimated where that girl was going to land in that thing, and I focused on that spot, and I made a slight adjustment as she was airborne. But this is one shot. I backlit everything. This is just an example of lens and what lens. And this is cricket ground in London, and this is with a fisheye. And this next picture is from exactly the same place with a 1200 millimeter lens. Exactly the same spot. Chris, were you at this? 1975?
No.
This is when Martina abdicated, and Russ Adams, who Chris knows, of course, and Russ was my mentor 45 years ago, and he's the only photographer in the Tennis Hall of Fame. And Russ ran past me and he grabbed my arm. He said, "Come with me." And he didn't even know what it was, but they were doing an impromptu press conference in this little enclosure that was about the size of these two tables. And she was announcing that she was abdicating and not going back to Czechoslovakia. And there are only about 4 or 5 images of it. There's John McEnroe with his first girlfriend in the backseat of my truck. Now, he's changed.
He's in a real labor.
Yeah. And that was a full page in Look magazine. That's in Germany. This is in the Laron Islands off the coast of France. That's where the man in the iron mask was imprisoned. And this is one of the monks that I spent a lot of time in the south of France and in France. This is a water vendor in Morocco. I shot this probably in 1968. This is Moscow under communism, and this is a communist rally, and you see Stalin and Lenin. And in the same place now, instead of that, they have weddings. So it's changed. There I am in Red Square. I apologize for all the pictures of me in here, but this is a perfect example of planning. One, you weren't allowed to take pictures in here. 2, it was freezing outside and very warm inside. And I had a camera with a 50mm lens inside my coat. And I knew that when I went in there, the lens was going to fog over, which it did. And I couldn't pull it out and start cleaning it off. So I went in there and didn't say anything and stood there for 5 or 6 minutes while I knew it was going to, I kind of did this. And then I pulled the camera out and made 2 images, and this is one of them. And it's, it's perfect. I mean, you get the candles, you look at the light on the 2 subjects on both sides.
You shot it from chest level?
From
down?
chest level.
So you weren't really able to focus or whatever you used?
No, but I knew how far it was. I knew all of that. So there's Nancy Lopez. She's actually doing that for me. This is not a tournament. This was for a hospital corporation, and again, this is shot on film, and still lights. No strobes. I had still lights set up. This is offshore of Jakarta, and I'm in another helicopter, and this is the company that I was working for has the boat down there, the service vessel is theirs, and the helicopter is theirs. And I shot for this company all over the world. Yeah.
Did you have them hover where you wanted to so you
Yes.
could take your photographs?
Yeah.
Stop here, I want this shot?
Yep. And I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in helicopters, and I was going back in, not too long after Vietnam, most of the pilots were Vietnam pilots, and they were nuts. I mean, they were great pilots, but they were nuts. And I was in Alaska photographing. We were at 4,000 feet, and I was standing outside the helicopter on the strut with a little line around my waist, and
So
photographing boats. But you couldn't do it from inside the helicopter, and that's why I shoot. And all of a sudden, the helicopter turns and I'm hanging. I fall off the strut and I'm hanging by this little safety cord, and he straightens out and I get it back, and I won't tell you what I said, but I said, "Why the heck did you do that?" He said, "Well, I saw a whale and I wanted to chase him." No.
Forgot you were hanging out there.
That's right. This is Patty Berg, who was a very good friend who died, one of the founders of the LPGA. It was one of her favorite portraits. This is, you know who Walter Yost is? The great Sports Illustrated photographer, who is one of the great photographers in the world. And Walter and I were standing next to each other. And you cannot, obviously, it's luck, but to have him standing right in the middle of that arrow, and and first of all, to have them back where I could use a lens and they wouldn't be tiny, because if they were 5 yards further, they wouldn't have worked. And then you've got Walter Payton holding Too Tall Jones, and I gave both of them prints of this. But so it worked out fine, and in the framing, and that's in the old Dallas Stadium. That's at Olympic this year. That's Phil. And if you think they don't watch the ball, you can see that This is a man that was arguably the greatest polo player that ever lived. He was a Texas cowboy, and I spent quite a bit of time with him. He's deceased now, and a man named Cecil Smith lived in Boerne, Texas.
Sorry, on the shot just before, are you using a long focal
Oops.
lens to get the one before that, the narrow depth of field?
Yes.
Or are you?
Yes, I am, and I'm using probably on that 450, around 450, and of course high shutter speed
Okay, so you're.
and wide open.
Yeah, you do wide.
Oh yeah,
So 2.8?
2.8. Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, the lens will do that. The longer you further away, it's going to shorten the distance behind the image. If you're closer, it broadens that, and if you've got people back there, you lose the subject in the frame.
You knew he was gonna be taking the shot. And
Oh, yeah.
You sat.
I got where I wanted to be and had the right shutter speed and the right everything. This is from a 10-meter board to a 3-meter board. This was an Olympic trial event, and I framed it this way because I wanted to be offset. And I never could decide whether I wanted that vertical or horizontal, but I ended up with the horizontal. This is a man who was a remarkable man. His name is Ricky Alvarez. He was the last living member of Pancho Villa's army. And he was a very good friend. He was a very famous sculptor in Mexico. He actually grew up in New Orleans, on the docks in New Orleans. He's a Mexican Indian. And this is in his studio in Mexico. And I shot this. That's all available light. Ricky was amazing. If you give him a few drinks, it's stories he would tell were really amazing. Now this is an Olympic event, and everybody knows what the rifle looks like. Everybody knows. So I chose to do this in silhouette because it shows the targets, it shows everything, and it worked perfectly. And of course, I knew it would be close to me. And again, angles. It gives you a view that most people never see. Yes.
Did you bracket?
No, I don't bracket, and I don't know how to bracket digitally. It's got a function on the camera, but I don't know how to do it. Yes.
In the beginning, you mentioned in low light situations you used the filter, and that the filter.
Sometimes you had to. Yes.
What kind of filter did you use?
Well, color adjustment.
Color adjustment.
Yeah, because the lights. Yeah, I always when I worked for CBS or things, I always would wish that they would be at some of the facilities that we had to work at, because if you go into a high school gym or a lot of college gyms back then, the light was horrible. And when television came in, of course, television can shoot at anything. They don't care about still photographers, but when television would come in, they would boost the light and change the color temperature so that it would balance with daylight film or something. But if it wasn't balanced, you had to make corrections. I mean, I have a Minolta color meter, which I used to use all the time to make the adjustment. Yes?
Back in the golf shot, the ball shot, did you use a burst?
Yeah, oh yeah, probably maybe 3 images.
That's all?
Yeah, yeah.
I know when to trip.
Huh?
I know when to hit the shutter.
Because I know. I've done this before. 40 years on the golf tour and the tennis tour. Yeah, I don't do, I mean, they're guys, they'll shoot literally 30 or 40 images on something like that and just throw them away and find the one that they like, and I don't do that. Yeah. And that's the truth. Here's an example. One of the things that you should know is the limitation of your lenses, because it's important when you're doing anything. And I would always prefer not to have to crop something. If you don't have to, that you can frame it in the camera, frame it in your mind first, then frame it in the camera. But you may not have that option. And this is an example. Now this is with my 450 on my camera from the Promenade. This was at the Open just the other day. And this is the actual picture. But I can then, if I wanted to crop it afterwards, I can do that. It's sharp enough to do that. So I can make a more interesting picture. I didn't do it in the original image because I couldn't. I was shooting at the complete range of the lens. But if I want to do it afterwards, then to me that's okay. So you can do that and frame it and make a more interesting image. Of course, if it's not sharp, you can't do that. This is a Rolex ad, and this was done in natural light, just with a reflector, no additional light. It's inside of a building. This was sent to me by somebody that works for Olympus. This was in the LA paper, and this was the US Open Golf at Congressional a year ago, and this was published in the paper. And you'll notice that the only photographer that's not taking a picture is me, up there in the upper right-hand side.
And what's going on over there?
So,
He's showing off his medal.
so he's showing the trophy.
Right, showing off his trophy.
Yeah,
No,
and this was on the sports page of the LA Times, and my friend saw it and sent it to me. He said, "Why aren't you taking a picture? Everybody else is taking a picture." So I sent him this to show him that I actually made the same picture. I just didn't have to shoot it for 30 minutes like everybody else. Since the royal couple is in Singapore now, this is a portrait of a man in Singapore. This was my 40th birthday. I'm 70, so it was 30 years ago. And as a present, he was drawing a picture of me, which I still have in my house, as a present that he was doing. This is an artist down on the quay, and the quay is not there anymore. They moved it. This is done with a very wide-angle lens. This is up in Stowe, Vermont, and I've used this picture many times. The horse was very nice. He had his ears propped up, and again, the silhouette. This is it's not a big file. So this is film. This is obviously the St. Louis Arch, and you've seen it, thousands of pictures of it. But I wanted to do something a little different. And the light was great, and the reflection. And there was a family sitting up. And this is in Vermont, and you can see the frame around it. And I've done this with many photographs to make cards, and you can put type in there, and it's something that all of you can do. And if you have scenics like this, you can think about doing that, because you can make and do them online or print them. And I've done that with many. Here's an example where these are cross-country skiers, but I didn't want to show the cross-country skiers because there's no picture. So I did this, focused on the branch, and you know what there's. This was a poster that was done for an oil company. This is Sunrise. And obviously the light's difficult. This was shot on film in West Texas, and they ended up making a poster out of it. This is on the Texas coast, and this is just a picture I liked with the backlight and the setting sun. It's one of my favorite pictures of Serena. This was a year ago. She's matured since then. Anybody ZZ Top fans?
Yeah.
That's the Texas governor with ZZ Top. I've known Billy Gibbons for probably 45 years or 50 years. And they're from Houston originally. This is Olympic, and this is the 18th hole. This was just in June. I got a call from a friend of mine and said you're in the New York Times, and I said no, I'm not. I didn't send any pictures to the New York Times. This was in the U.S. Open a few years ago. I said I didn't send anything to the New York Times. He said no, you're in the New York Times, and this was on the front of the sports page, and there I am in the red shirt in the back. This has I didn't realize this when I downloaded it. It has my copyright on there, but there's Tiger with his new Magic Club. And by the way, going back to the internet, I've got on my website, I have a lot of pictures, probably more than I should have on there, and I've really got to go back now and watermark all of them, because I've found so far maybe 25 that people have pulled off my website. And I do a name search every once in a while, and right after the start of the Olympics, I did a name search, and a website for one of the Olympic athletes came up, and they had 2 of my pictures from my website, from the Olympic trials, on their website. And when they got back from London, they had a pretty sizable invoice waiting for them. That's Tiger's last major win. That's out in San Diego. And there's Tiger when he was a skinny kid.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah. And just an example, this is actually at the U.S. clay courts, and this is just an example of again, this is shot with a long lens, obviously, but the framing and there's lots of graphic things. You can make good pictures, and you don't have a bad, a busy background. I shot this picture through the windshield of my car at 60 miles an hour.
Hopefully you're not driving.
I was driving, and I saw this picture, and I shot it, and I've sold it I don't know how many times, trucking people to all kinds of things, and I didn't shoot a lot of pictures. I shot one, I think, maybe two, but I fixed the exposure. This is Ben Hogan, and everybody knows who Ben Hogan was. This was at the Women's U.S. Open in Fort Worth in 1991. And Hogan was out there, that's his home club, and he knew this golfer, this Chris Cheddar, and he came out to see her. Nobody knew who he was. There's a camera, a television camera there. There was no other still photographer around, none. They had no idea who he was. And I made 10 or 12 images of this, and of course Chris has them. And he went into seclusion not long after this and died about 2 or 3 years later, and he almost was never seen in public after this. And Chris published a book a year ago, and that picture is on the cover of her book. That's in Istanbul in 1968, 67. Shot with very grainy film, and it's always been a favorite picture. It was shot with old Agfa 800 film, which was horrible film, but it had the grain was like this. Yeah. But the kid jumping up there, and I can tell you, when I took this picture, I didn't know a lot about photography. I had one body, and I had 3 lenses, and I was living in North Africa and traveling in North Africa and in Europe. This is in Venice, and you can't get here anymore. First of all, the horses are gone, but you can't climb up here anymore. These pictures, you're going to see all that. This is a sequence, and this is going back to thinking. And one of the things, and I'm guilty of it, and all of you are guilty of it, is you'll make a picture of something where there may be some action, and then you stop, and you don't see it anymore. And I've done it. And in this case, this is the World Equestrian Games, the only time it's ever been in the United States. It's huge. And I was actually working for the Saudis. And this is a sequence at one of the water jumps. I shot that with a 300 millimeter lens. And this is why you need to follow up.
Uh-oh. It's going down.
Uh-oh. Yep. Oh.
Now, the water jumps are very difficult for horses. And the reason is that we know they're only this deep, but the horse doesn't know that. So when the horse goes over that, the animal has no idea. So this is a whole sequence.
Was the rider okay?
Well,
About the
you
horse?
have to wait.
Oh, the horse is good. Uh-oh.
This is a Japanese rider. See, horse and rider are fine. But if I had stopped looking or something else, and I wasn't thinking, I didn't have any foresight that anything was going to happen. But luckily,
You kept shooting.
I kept
That had
shooting.
to be digital and on burst.
it was digital.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't on burst. It was just, I mean,
But you took-
oh yeah,
You
yeah. I
just
kept the
kept
drive
shooting.
going, and this is why this is from an Olympic trial. Since you wanted snow pictures, I know everybody's been yelling for
the
snow
horse
pictures.
shot, were you handheld or was that on a
Handheld.
tripod?
I don't use a monopod. I handheld everything. I used to be able to handhold a 600 down to about a 15th of a second. I don't know if I can do it now. I haven't tried it in a while, but this was World Cup downhill.
Oh,
Once again, this is a card that I made. This is a card that I made. And this, you know, I put the frame on it, and this is a door, and I shot this like this. This is in the Yucatan, and I was doing a shoot with this model down there, and I had no idea. All these kids lined up had no idea who she was, and of course couldn't speak English. And this little girl never could figure out what was going on. And all of a sudden they all started laughing. I have no idea what happened, but it's a wonderful picture. When I took this picture, no pictures were allowed. And this is in Houston, and I had the only 600 in Houston, so I was way back shooting Elvis. So that's it. But to go back to you know I really want to emphasize fundamentals, and if you can see pictures before you make them, when you're traveling, think, you know, while you're arriving at a destination, think about what the subjects are going to be and what you want to take home with you. No matter how you're shooting, whether you're shooting digital, some people still shoot film. There were a couple of people shooting film at the Open. Don't ask me why, but they were. And if you think about what you want it to look like, and you frame it in the camera, and you can do it with any camera, and if you don't have a zoom lens, what you do is you do this. You walk up a little closer, and because it gives you the limitations of what your lens can do. And if you maximize that, then you're going to be a lot happier, and you will make those pictures. And you have to remember how you made them, but it'll make those pictures. The next time you do it, you'll remember that, and you'll start learning. Everything I see is a photograph to me. When I'm walking down the street and if I focus on something, I see it as a photograph, and I immediately crop it in my mind. And I know if I had the camera, and I might have this with me, but I don't have my big camera, and I focus on that, and I know exactly how I would make it look. Now there might be some small changes if something really distracting is sticking out of one of the corners, but I do that constantly, and I've done that for almost my entire career, and it has served me well. And I'll look at a scene. I'm going to go back real quick before we finish to storytelling, and storytelling is what all of us do. And I teach at a film school that's part of Boston University. And one of the things, by the way, since I don't know anything about photography, I carry this with me, which is a Kodak brochure from maybe 35 years ago, and it tells me everything I want to know if I need to look. I don't understand any of it, but the old adage of who, what, where, when, and why works for storytelling. And I always add the word how, because when you do what we do and what Chris does, when you do an event, the how is very important, because if you can't be where you need to be, and you can't have the light that you want, and you can't frame it, you can't make the picture. And you know, now in a lot of events that we do, you're credentialed. In New York State, they do full background checks on everybody after 9/11. So far, I've passed them. So the how is almost as important as anything else in storytelling, because you need to know how to get where you're going to go and where you're going to be. So if you arrive at something and you're traveling and you want to shoot a market, a vegetable market, take a look at what it looks like and walk around a little bit and see how you get to where you want to be, and if you're going to interrupt anybody or step over anybody, what you have to do to make the picture that you want. Because you don't want to have to rely necessarily, if you have a zoom lens, if you don't have to rely on having to be back at the edge of the market and zooming on something in the middle, and you really want to do a wide angle, then you have to figure out how to get there and what it takes to do it and what the light's going to look like when you get there. So it's important to do that. And one other thing that and we talked about the ethics of photographing people, and we're talking about the Amish, and I try not to intrude on people when you have to do it sometimes, but I try not to do it. and I'm pretty good at it. We have some colleagues that don't necessarily try to do that. But I'm going to finish with one thing that has nothing to do with what we're doing here, and that's the ethics of being a photographer. And some of you are amateur photographers. There may be some professionals out here. If you remember Animal in Lou Grant, Animal was the worst thing that ever happened to photography. Because I tell young photographers, and I talk to young photographers all over the country, and I have for years and years and years, and a lot of colleagues of mine, knowing the kind of clients that I have and the work that I've done, come to me for advice. And I tell them that if you do something bad, it reflects on every other photographer, because it's exactly what the public thinks you're going to be doing. I tell them two things. When they go out on a job, dress properly, and always work until the person you're working for that you report to tells you to stop. I've worked for a lot of big companies, and I've seen photographers that have been at events at a hotel, or for instance, and they'll go out and shoot for 35 minutes, and then they're out lying by the pool. If they think that their client doesn't know that they're out lying by the pool, they're nuts. And I'll get out there, I'll shoot 10 rolls of film that I don't need until somebody tells me it's okay to stop. And the ethics that are important to me, and I've always, since I became a photographer, it's been important to me to let other photographers know that somebody's looking at them all the time. We're not invisible. People come up to me all the time on the street or whatever, and they say, I know you, I saw you at so-and-so. I have no idea who they are, because they're one of 10,000 people behind me, but I'm out there, by myself or with some other photographers. And they see you, and they see what you do, and see how you dress, and see how you act, and what you say. And it's important, and just keep it in mind when you're out with the public, because the public is who supports you, and they're the ones that look at your photographs and give you the accolades that you do or do not deserve. And the great satisfaction that you get from this business is that somebody cares enough to like your work and compliment your work, and if you're a professional, to pay for it. And that's why I got into this, and I learned that very quickly, and that's why I've stayed in it all these years, because I was in a position to not do this if I didn't want to do it, and I didn't like it, and I've always liked it. And as I said before, I've had a great career and a blessed career, and I wouldn't have changed it for anything. Anyway, I appreciate it, and thank you. And if you want to ask some questions afterwards, just ask me.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.